Lyria had encountered some pretty unhinged things in her time, but watching an AI-backed warlord try to convince a group of scavengers that Earth was the new mecca of the universe had to be in her top 10. Not every day you see a guy with an army of drones at his back, preaching like a second-rate televangelist. Voss, her mentor, leaned over and whispered, "You'd think they'd at least hire someone less." Oily, Lyria smirked, nodding towards the warlord whose shiny suit glimmered like a disco ball under the harsh lights of the bustling marketplace. That's the thing about zealots, Voss. They never quite nail the subtlety part. The Gilded Shackle was a lively fragment of the Dyson Swarm, a place where desperation met commerce and shook hands with a smile that never reached the eyes. It was one of those places where the air tasted like metal and lies, and every corner had a story that started with "You'll never believe how I ended up here." "And I thought scavenging was the bottom of the barrel," Lyria muttered, eyeing the crowd that had gathered around the warlord's podium, faces upturned like flowers to a toxic sun. Voss chuckled, a sound like gravel being ground into even smaller gravel. "Well, you know what they say about barrels. There's always a new low." The warlord, who introduced himself with the pretentiousness only someone with nothing to lose could muster, went by the name High Prophet Flint. Lyria assumed he'd added the extra N to seem more important. She wasn't buying it. "Look, we all know Earth's been turned into some kind of celestial destination," Flint was saying, arms raised like he was about to lift off. "The AI overlords have seen to that. But it's more than just a place. It's a spiritual awakening, yeah, and I'm the queen of the Martian canals," Lyria snorted, tossing a cap into the air and catching it. Voss scratched his beard, a wiry tangle of gray that made him look like he'd crawled out of a history book about mad hermits. "Sounds like another scam, but a lucrative one if we play it right." Lyria raised an eyebrow. "You're thinking of what?" "Selling keychains. I went to Earth and all I got was this lousy existential crisis." Voss winked, and Lyria knew that meant trouble. "No, my dear Lyria, we're going to do what we do best. We're going to find out just how deep this rabbit hole goes, and maybe even come out of it richer than a warlord with a messiah complex." The crowd burst into applause, a hollow sound as they swallowed Flint's promises of paradise and enlightenment. Lyria wondered if any of them realized just how many bones were likely buried under those golden streets he was talking about. "Do you really think Earth could be, worth it?" Lyria asked, more to keep the conversation going than anything else. Voss shrugged, adjusting the strap of his satchel, which seemed to carry everything from ancient relics to last week's lunch. "Worth is subjective, my girl. But if these cultists and their AI want it so bad, there's gotta be something left for the likes of us to profit from. No one's been back to Earth in decades. Not since they put the place on lockdown," Lyria reminded him. "You're not exactly making it sound like Disneyland. And yet," Voss said with a gleam in his eye, "here we are, about to crash the party." High Prophet Flint wrapped up his sermon with a flourish, and Lyria couldn't help but roll her eyes. It was time to make themselves scarce before the inevitable collection plate made its rounds. She and Voss sidled away, blending into the market's chaos, where the scent of fried something or other mingled with the ever-present tang of burned circuits. "First stop?" Lyria asked, glancing at Voss, who was already pulling a crumpled map from the depths of his bag. "The docks. I've got a contact waiting. A man who may or may not owe me a favor, and he's not a warlord in disguise," Lyria teased. Voss snorted. "Perish the thought. Baron's more of an entrepreneur, in the sense that he'd sell his grandmother for the right price. But he knows things, useful things." As they navigated through the throngs of traders, each hawking wares that ranged from the genuinely enticing to the absolutely questionable, Lyria kept a hand on her knife. Not that she'd need it, but in the Gilded Shackle, it was more about making a statement. "Think we'll need to bribe him?" Lyria asked. "Baron?" "Nah," Voss replied, sidestepping a vendor who was trying to convince anyone with ears that they needed an antique toaster. "He's the kind of guy who gets his kicks from knowing something you don't. Information's the only currency that matters to him." They reached the docks, a sprawling labyrinth of ships that looked like they'd been cobbled together from spare parts and hope. The smell of ozone was stronger here, mingling with the scent of desperation that clung to everything in the shackle. "Which one's his?" Lyria asked, scanning the ships. They were all so patched up it was like looking at a fleet of Frankenstein's monsters. Voss pointed to a vessel that looked somewhat less likely to explode than the others. "The one that resembles a tin can with delusions of grandeur." They approached, and Lyria noticed a man lounging against the hull, puffing on a cigarette like it was a lifeline. He had the kind of face that suggested he'd been on the wrong end of a few too many bar fights. "Baron," Voss greeted, spreading his arms like they were old friends. "Still ugly, I see." Baron grinned, showing teeth that were more metal than enamel. "And you're still a bastard, Voss. What brings you to my humble abode?" Voss gestured to Lyria. "Baron, meet my protege, Lyria." "Lyria, this is Baron, the man who can sell ice to an android." "Charmed," Lyria said dryly. Baron sized her up, his grin widening. "Always nice to meet another seeker of truth." Lyria crossed her arms, matching his sardonic look with one of her own. "We're looking into this Earth business. Thought you might have something we could use." Baron flicked ash from his cigarette, considering. "Ah, the pilgrimage. Flint's little cult of the AI and their holy land. It's a mess, but a profitable one." Voss leaned in, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "We need to know if it's worth the trip. The real deal, not the crap they're peddling." Baron ran a hand through his hair, which looked like it hadn't seen a brush since the last century. "Well, there's a rumor that the AI got something big planned. Something that involves more than just fleecing the faithful." Lyria perked up. "Like what?" "Like they're gearing up for a show. Something that'll make their dear followers see the light, or at least part with a lot of credits." Voss exchanged a look with Lyria. "Sounds like there's trouble on the horizon." "Just the kind we thrive in." Baron chuckled, nodding. "Yeah, if you can call it thriving. But hey, if you're aiming to get mixed up with that, you'll need more than luck. Good thing we've got charm and wit to spare." Lyria shot back, earning a laugh from Baron. "And here I thought you lost your sense of humor, Voss." "She's a keeper," Voss smirked. "I try to surround myself with the best." Baron ground out his cigarette with the heel of his boot. "I can get you closer to the truth, but it'll cost you." Lyria arched an eyebrow. "And what's the going rate for a secret these days?" Baron grinned, eyes twinkling with mischief. "A favor. Someday somewhere, when I need it the most, you'll help settle a little score of mine." Voss and Lyria exchanged a look, the kind that said this is probably a terrible idea, but when had that ever stopped them? Voss extended his hand. "Deal." They shook on it, and Lyria felt that familiar twist in her gut, the one that warned her they were diving headfirst into a pool that might be full of sharks. But then, life in the gilded shackle was nothing if not an endless series of questionable decisions. Baron's intel led them to a rundown hangar on the outskirts of the docks, where the air was still, and the shadows felt a little too eager to cling to anything that moved. "Feels like a setup," Lyria muttered, her hand edging towards her knife. Voss chuckled softly. "In a place like this, it'd be rude for it not to be." They slipped inside, greeted by the sight of old ships cannibalized for parts, their innards strewn across the floor like the aftermath of a particularly nasty brawl. "Looks like a graveyard for dreams," Lyria said, stepping over a tangle of wires and metal. "Graveyards are quieter and usually less smelly," Voss corrected, picking his way through the debris. In the center of it all stood a pedestal dusty and forgotten, with a relic perched atop it like a crown jewel in a thief's hoard. It was a small, nondescript device, but its simplicity was deceiving. "That's it?" Lyria asked, eyebrow raised. Voss nodded, eyes gleaming with the kind of excitement only a relic hunter could muster. "That's the key to Flint's little kingdom, or so Baron says." Lyria shot him a look. "And you believe him?" Voss shrugged. "Not really. But there's only one way to find out." As they approached, a noise echoed through the hangar, footsteps, deliberate and menacing. Lyria and Voss exchanged a quick glance, hands darting to their weapons. "Time to meet the welcoming committee," Lyria quipped, readying herself for whatever ended up coming through those doors. And with that, the hangar erupted into chaos as figures emerged from the shadows, armed to the teeth and looking none too pleased to see them. As the shadows shifted, morphing into silhouettes of muscle and menace, Lyria couldn't help but think how friendly they appeared. By friendly, she meant about as welcoming as an airlock malfunction. The gang seemed to be a cross between a military unit and a junkyard scrap heap, all shiny weapons and less than shiny brains. "Well, if it isn't the guest of honor," Lyria said, drawing her knife. It wasn't much, but it was sharp and comforting in her palm. "You guys missed the invitation-only part." The leader of the crew, a hulk of a man with a face like a bruised melon, stepped forward. "Hand over the relic," he demanded, voice gravelly enough to sand wood. Voss, with his trademark calm, leaned against a derelict ship hull. "Relic? You mean this paperweight? I'd sooner hand over my liver." "Don't tempt them," Lyria muttered. The goon squad wasn't laughing, and Lyria counted at least 3 guns trained on them. It was that kind of day. "I don't suppose you want to talk this out over a nice cup of oil and vinegar," Voss said, scratching his beard, which seemed to have its own opinions. "We're not negotiating," the leader growled. "Shame," Voss replied. "I had some lovely negotiation lines ready." "But since you're insistent," he shrugged, a casual motion that Lyria knew was anything but. And just like that, the hangar became a symphony of chaos. Lyria dodged behind a pile of scrap as shots rang out, the sound echoing off rusted metal walls. She didn't need to worry about keeping Voss alive. He thrived in this sort of madness. "Don't you guys have anything better to do?" she yelled, throwing her knife with a spin. It thudded into a henchman's leg, more hindrance than harm, but enough to keep him grounded. "You kidding?" Voss called back, his laughter punctuated by gunfire. "This is their highlight reel." The goons were persistent, she'd give them that. But persistence wasn't everything, and soon enough, their numbers began to dwindle as Voss, with the efficiency of a man who's been there and done that, took them down one by one. Lyria popped up from her cover, retrieving her knife with a grimace as she wiped it on a scrap of cloth. "Can we please get out of here before more of them show up? I'm not interested in becoming the hangar's newest decoration." "Agreed," Voss said, pocketing the relic. "Let's make like a tree," and a sharp whistle cut through the air, stopping him mid-sentence. More figures filled the hangar entrance, and Lyria felt her heart sink. This wasn't just a group. This was a bloody army. "High Prophet Flint sends his regards," said a woman stepping forward, her voice smooth as polished steel. She was dressed in the garb of the cult, robes that tried to look holy but came off as stage props for a bad sci-fi play. Lyria's knife was back in her hand, though she knew it was mostly bravado at this point. "Didn't realize invitations to your little gathering included complimentary threats." The woman smiled, a cold, calculated thing. "You two have been quite the thorn in our side. But that ends now. Hand over the relic and maybe we'll let you walk away." Voss sighed, looking every bit the world-weary traveler he was. "We're not exactly known for just handing over our hard-earned treasures." "Then this ends poorly for you," she replied, snapping her fingers. The sound was drowned out by the click of safety catches being released, a symphony of impending doom. "Time for Plan B," Voss whispered, and Lyria braced herself. But before they could act, the cultists surged forward in a wave. It wasn't even a fight. It was a capture. 2 against too many. They were overwhelmed, their weapons confiscated, arms pinned behind their backs. "Well," Lyria huffed as they were dragged before the woman, "this is humiliating." Voss gave a wheezy chuckle. "Ah, humiliation. The universe's way of reminding us we're not as clever as we think." "You're right about one thing," the woman said, taking the relic from Voss's pocket. "This little adventure is over for you." The cultists bound Voss more tightly, and Lyria felt a sharp twist in her gut as they pulled him away. She'd seen that look on him before, calm, resigned, but with a flicker of defiance. "You'll regret this," she spat, though the bravado was wearing thin. "No," the woman replied, "I think not." As Voss was led toward one of the ships, Lyria seized her chance. She twisted, slipped the grip of her captor just long enough to break into a run. A few shots rang out, but she ducked and wove through the debris, instincts and adrenaline kicking in. "Get her!" the woman shouted, but Lyria was already at the hangar's edge, vanishing into the maze of the docks. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs threatened mutiny. Only then did she stop, heart pounding loud enough to drown out the noise of the shackle around her. Voss was gone, captured, and she was alone, but she couldn't afford to dwell on it, not if she wanted to make it out alive. The Gilded Shackle was a sprawling mess of commerce and criminality, a place where you could disappear if you knew how. Lyria knew how. She ducked into a side alley, avoiding the main thoroughfares where cultists would likely be combing for her. She needed a plan, and fast. Voss had taught her everything she knew about staying alive in the galaxy's less-than-hospitable places, and now she had to put all that to use. First things first, find help. Baron was a snake, but he was their snake. If anyone had an idea of what the cult was planning, it'd be him. Navigating the shackle's underbelly was like swimming through a sea of rogues and relics. Everywhere she looked, someone was trying to sell something or steal something. It was home, in a way, and she blended into the chaos as she made her way to Baron's haunt. The docks were a warren of tunnels and passages, crammed with ships that had seen better days. She found Baron lounging outside his ship, flicking through a data slate. "Baron," she snapped, breathless and more than a little pissed. He looked up, a smirk playing across his face. "Lyria, didn't expect to see you back so soon. Voss is captured. The cult's got him." The smirk faded. "Shit." "Yes, shit," she echoed. "They took the relic." Baron rubbed his metal teeth, thoughtful. "They won't stop with just that. They're up to something bigger." "Great. Bigger and badder." "Just what I need right now." Baron shrugged, a gesture that managed to convey both apathy and interest. "I might be able to help, but it'll cost." "Of course it will." Lyria rolled her eyes. "What's the going rate this time, my firstborn?" "Nah, just a favor, you know the usual." Lyria sighed. "Fine, whatever, just spill it." Baron's grin returned. "Word is Flint's planning a big reveal. Something that'll rope in the rest of the warlords. They need them on their side for whatever spectacle they're planning on Earth. And I'm guessing they're not just looking to resurrect Disneyland." He chuckled. "Hardly. They're gathering everyone for a summit, showing off their toys, promising power, the usual culty crap. So how do we crash this party and get Voss back?" Baron leaned in, lowering his voice. "You can't go in guns blazing. They'd cut you down before you got 2 steps in the door, but there's a way in through the old shipyards, an entrance they used before the cult took over. I can get you the access codes." "Really? And you didn't think to mention this before?" "You didn't ask," he retorted, shrugging. Lyria rubbed her forehead, trying to stave off the impending headache. "Fine. Get me the codes and I'll make sure we're square next time you need a favor." Baron nodded. "Consider it done. But be careful, Lyria. They're playing for keeps." She didn't need the warning, but it was nice to hear someone cared, even if it was just to keep his own bargaining chip alive. With the codes in hand and a knot forming in her stomach, Lyria prepared to do what she did best, dive headfirst into danger. As she made her way through the shackle's labyrinthine corridors, Lyria cursed every decision that had led her here. But she was committed now. Voss had risked everything for her more times than she could count. She owed him, and more importantly, she owed herself the chance to prove she could handle this mess on her own. The shipyards were a graveyard of forgotten vessels, their hulks looming like ancient sentinels. Lyria moved among the wrecks, stealthy as a shadow, until she found the entrance Baron had described, a hatch half buried under years of neglect. With a deep breath and shaky hands, she punched in the access codes. The hatch hissed open, revealing a dark tunnel beyond. No turning back now. Once inside, she moved quickly but carefully, conscious of every sound, every shift of light. The cult might be fanatical, but they were thorough. If she was caught, there'd be no second chances. The tunnel wound deeper, leading into the heart of the cult's territory. She could hear distant voices, the hum of machines, the electric tension that filled the air. Whatever they were planning, it was big. Lyria crept closer, finding herself at the edge of a vast chamber. Below, cultists moved like ants, preparing for something monumental. At the center, High Prophet Flint stood, arms raised, surrounded by warlords and soldiers alike. This was it, the summit Baron had warned about. Her eyes scanned the crowd, searching desperately for Voss. There he was, bound and flanked by guards, but unbowed, his eyes meeting hers with a flicker of surprise. She waved, a small, defiant gesture, and he nodded in return. She had a plan, and though it was half-baked at best, it was something. Lyria moved back, heart racing as she formulated her approach. She had to get to Voss, had to disrupt whatever ceremony was unfolding below. If she could create enough chaos, they might have a shot at escape. With nothing to lose and everything to gain, Lyria prepared to crash the cult's party, her knife ready, her instincts sharp, and her resolve unyielding. If the universe wanted to test her, she'd give it one hell of a show. Lyria leaned against a wall, catching her breath, feeling the pulse of adrenaline ebbing away. The shipyard was as silent as a graveyard at midnight, except for the distant hum of machinery, a comforting lullaby in this metal jungle. She'd need more than her usual audacious antics to pull Voss out of the High Prophet's snare. Help was needed, and not from just any ragtag bunch of misfits, but the kind of misfits that would make misfits look orderly. Enter Torvin, rebel leader, schemer, and the kind of man who could smile while planning a heist over tea. Lyria had heard rumors he was holed up somewhere in the shackles' underbelly. He was her best shot if she could just find the bastard. Her path twisted through the shackles' labyrinthine passages, a veritable warren of rust and desperation. She moved with purpose, eyes scanning for signs, ears open for the telltale whispers that guided those who knew how to listen. The rebels were nestled in an old cargo bay, its rusty doors like two ancient sentinels, pretending to guard something valuable. Lyria knocked with a rhythm known only to those desperate or foolhardy enough to seek rebellion as their bedfellow. A slot opened in the door at eye level. "Who's asking?" "Lyria. Here to see Torvin." The slot slid shut, and Lyria heard the grating of bolts. The door squealed in protest as it opened, and she stepped across the threshold into a world of half-baked plans and fully-baked cynicism. Torvin greeted her with the kind of smile that promised mischief and mayhem. "Lyria, darling, come to join our merry band of outlaws." "I'm not here to sing songs around the campfire, Torvin. I need your help." He gestured to a cluttered table, maps and data slates strewn across it like the aftermath of a bureaucratic tornado. "Help," she says. "Help against who this time?" "The cult's got Voss. They're planning something big, something that could put us all in the void." Torvin leaned back, his grin never faltering. "And why would we risk our necks for your lost lamb? Because if they succeed, they won't stop here. They'll spread like a cosmic rash, and I doubt even your merry band can scratch that itch." He considered her words, his eyes narrowing as if weighing them on celestial scales. "Fine, we'll help. But you're in it with us all the way," Lyria nodded. "I'm not going anywhere." The rebels operated with the kind of chaos that would make a cat herd look orderly. They were a motley crew, each with their own skills, quirks, and the kind of banter that suggested they spent more time together than was probably healthy. Torvin gathered them around the table. "All right, listen up. Lyria's got a plan, and before you ask, yes, it involves sneaking into the most heavily guarded part of the shackle." A chorus of groans and sarcastic remarks followed, but Lyria raised her hand. "Look, I get it. It sounds insane, but it's our best shot. We've got codes to an old entrance. We slip in, get Voss, and figure out what the cult's cooking before it boils over." "How many cultists are we talking about?" piped up a wiry woman with a shock of blue hair that looked like it had lost a fight with an electric socket. "Enough to make a small army look like a dinner party," Lyria replied dryly. "Fantastic," the woman replied, her sarcasm as sharp as her collection of knives. Torvin clapped his hands. "Right then, we move at 0:30, gear up." The rebels dispersed, each with their own preparations to make. Lyria found herself by the supply lockers, checking her knife, her only companion in this insanity. The blue-haired woman sidled up, her grin as wide as her curiosity. "Name's Kelly. You're the famous Lyria, huh?" "Famous. I was going for notorious." Lyria shot back, checking a plasma pistol. Better PR. They shared a laugh, a brief moment of levity before the storm. Everyone knew what was at stake, and they knew the odds were about as favorable as a blizzard on Mercury. As the ire of their venture approached, Lyria found herself alongside Torvin once more, reviewing final details. The plan was as straightforward as they come. Get in, cause a distraction, grab Voss, and get out. Simple plans had a way of turning complex when reality had its say. "Ready?" Torvin asked, his tone half serious, half joking. "Ready as I'll ever be," Lyria replied, straightening her jacket. "Let's go be heroes, or at least look good failing." The rebels moved through the shackles' underbelly like shadows, blending into the ever-present gloom. The entrance Lyria had found, forgotten by time, was just ahead. It loomed like an open maw, daring them to enter. Torvin punched in the codes, and with a hiss, the door opened to reveal the tunnel beyond. One last shared glance, a nod, and they were in. If the shackle was a rusted relic, this tunnel was its forgotten sibling, dark, damp, and reeking of neglect. They moved quickly but cautiously, weapons drawn, ready for anything. Lyria led the way, her instincts sharp, every sense on high alert. As they neared the chamber, the hum of activity grew louder, a hive of cultists buzzing with anticipation. Torvin signaled for silence, and they crept to the edge of the vast chamber, taking in the scene below. The sight was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. High Prophet Flint stood at the center, arms raised as if commanding the universe itself. Surrounding him were the warlords, their eyes fixed on him with a mix of reverence and greed. Lyria scanned the crowd, her heart leaping when she spotted Voss. He was still bound but very much alive, a small mercy in this nightmare. She turned to Torvin. "We need a distraction, something big." Torvin's grin was downright wicked. "Oh, I've got something that will make fireworks look like a candle-lit dinner." He nodded to Kelly, who slipped a small device from her pocket, a portable EMP, the kind of thing that would wreak havoc on any tech-heavy gathering. "Hit that and the lights go out for everyone. You've got 2 minutes tops before they reboot," Torvin explained. "More than enough time," Lyria agreed, her mind racing with possibilities. They just needed a window, a brief moment of chaos to slip in and out. As Kelly set the device, Lyria steeled herself, every muscle tense like a coiled spring. This was it, the moment that would decide everything. The EMP detonated with a muffled thud, and instantly the chamber was plunged into darkness. Voices rose in confusion, the cultists stumbling as the artificial lights died. Lyria moved, her heart pounding in her chest like a war drum. She slipped through the chaos, her eyes locked on Voss. She reached him, cutting through his bindings with her trusty knife. He grinned at her, the kind of grin that suggested insanity was their default state. "You took your sweet time," he quipped, rubbing his wrists. "Traffic," she replied, pulling him up. "Let's get out of here before they figure out the lights aren't just a mood setting." Together, they navigated the chaos, slipping through the disoriented cultists. Torvin and the rebels were causing their own brand of mayhem, drawing attention away from their escape route. As they reached the tunnel entrance, Voss paused, looking back at the chaos. "You know, I've missed this kind of madness." "Yes, well, let's miss it from a distance," Lyria retorted, tugging him along. They moved swiftly through the tunnel, the rebels covering their retreat with the kind of efficiency that came from years of practice, or maybe just a healthy fear of death. Reaching the other side, they regrouped, adrenaline still thrumming through their veins. Lyria took a deep breath, relief flooding her system as the realization that they'd pulled it off sunk in. Torvin clapped her on the back. "Hell of a show, Lyria. Hope you remember this next time you're in a jam." "Trust me, I won't forget," she replied, her voice tinged with gratitude and exhaustion. "Drinks on me when this is all over. For now, we need to lay low. Flint's not going to be happy losing his centerpiece," Torvin advised. "And I thought he was such an upstanding guy," Voss added, his sarcasm as fresh as ever. With their mission a success, at least for now, the rebels melted back into the shackles' shadows, leaving behind the chaos they'd wrought. Lyria and Voss stayed close, sharing the silent understanding that their fight was far from over. The cult's influence was spreading, their plans for Earth still a looming threat, but they'd bought themselves time, a precious commodity in this deadly game. As they retreated, Lyria made a silent promise, to herself, to Voss, to everyone at the mercy of Flint's twisted vision. They'd stop him or die trying, and knowing her luck, probably both. But for now, they were breathing, and that was a victory all on its own. Torvin's grin was downright wicked, the kind of grin that made you wonder if his skull was populated by more than just teeth. Lyria eyed him warily, knowing that whatever scheme he had up his sleeve would probably involve more explosions than a malfunctioning firework factory. "Are you sure about this EMP idea, Torvin?" she asked, arching an eyebrow that spoke volumes about her skepticism. "Sure as a one-legged man in a butt-kicking contest," he replied with a wink, and she couldn't help but chuckle, despite the situation. The rebels had gathered like a ragtag family reunion, complete with the awkward hugs and even more awkward silences, each one clutching their weapon of choice as if it were a security blanket. They didn't know if they'd get to use them or if they'd just end up as space debris. "All right, let's roll out before we start growing roots," Lyria barked, nodding towards Kelly, who was busy fiddling with the EMP device. The lot of them moved with the kind of confidence that only came from having absolutely no idea what you were walking into. They snaked through the rusted intestines of the shackle, moving like shadows in a place that had forgotten what light looked like. It was a route only the desperate or the downright stupid would take, but thankfully, their group encompassed both. As they neared the meeting chamber, the sound of chanting reached them, a monotonous drone that could lull a hyperactive toddler to sleep. Lyria's stomach twisted at the noise, a reminder of the cult's growing influence. It was the kind of sound that made you wish you had earplugs or a heavy blunt object to repeatedly hit yourself with. Torvin held up a hand, signaling a stop, and they huddled together like penguins in a snowstorm. "All right, people, remember the plan. Kelly hits the EMP, chaos ensues, and we snatch Voss while everyone's too busy picking their jaws up off the floor. And if things go south," someone asked, probably hoping for reassurance. "Then we die spectacularly, leaving behind a good-looking corpse and a hell of a story," Torvin replied, his grin never faltering. Lyria caught Kelly's eye and nodded. It was time to make or break, and Lyria had no intention of breaking. They edged forward, hearts pounding louder than a bad techno beat. The chamber was vast, shaped like a giant's hollowed-out skull. High Prophet Flint stood on a platform, arms outstretched like a messiah waiting for applause. Around him, cultists were arrayed like a sea of misguided fashion statements. But no one was looking their way, and Kelly used the opportunity to slip the EMP device from her pocket. She grinned at Lyria, her eyes alight with mischief. "Ready to give him a blackout they won't forget. Let's hope they don't have a backup generator," Lyria shot back, her grip tightening on her knife. Kelly hit the switch, and the world plunged into darkness like someone had snuffed out the stars. The chamber erupted into chaos, the hum of confused cultists drowning out everything else. Lyria moved, her body on autopilot, weaving through the mass of flailing arms and panicked yelps. Her eyes flicked towards the stage, where Flint was now gesticulating wildly, trying to restore order with all the success of a headless chicken. She found Voss, just as they'd left him, tied up like a reluctant Christmas turkey. His eyes widened with recognition and relief as she cut him loose. "Nice of you to drop by," he quipped, rubbing his wrists with a wince. "I aim to please," Lyria replied, pulling him to his feet. "Now, let's get out of here before they realize this isn't some avant-garde performance piece." But just as they turned to go, the lights flickered back on, and the confused murmurs of the cultists turned into something far more organized and far more menacing. Flint had regained his composure, and his voice cut through the din like a knife through warm butter. "Brothers and sisters," he boomed, his voice bouncing off the walls. "Do not be swayed by this trickery. We have been chosen for a great pilgrimage to Earth, our sacred destination. Together we shall ascend. The cultists, now more energized than ever, began chanting anew, their voices rising in a crescendo that sent a shiver down Lyria's spine. It was as if the EMP had been a slap in the face that had only woken them up. "Well, that's new," Voss muttered, his eyes scanning the room for danger. "Yeah, they're taking their party to Earth. Just what we need, more fanatics on a planet that's already falling apart," Lyria replied, her voice laced with sarcasm. They backed away, moving towards the exit as the cultists surged forward, caught up in this newfound fervor. Torvin and the others were already fighting their way through, creating a path amidst the chaos. They made it to the tunnel, the oppressive dark a welcome relief from the madness behind them. Lyria took a moment to catch her breath, her heart still racing like a pod racer on steroids. "Nice work," Torvin said, clapping her on the shoulder. "Didn't think we'd pull it off with our heads still attached." "Well, the night's still young," Lyria replied, her voice dry as desert sand. "And now we've got bigger problems. They're planning a mass pilgrimage to Earth." Torvin's face darkened, his smile fading. "Great. Just what we need, a bunch of space zealots trampling around on the home turf. We'll have to stop them," Voss said, his expression turning serious for the first time. "They can't be allowed to reach Earth with whatever they've got planned." "Yeah, because what's left of Earth really needs more lunatics," Kelly added, rolling her eyes. "What's next?" "A bake sale to fund their space crusade. First things first, we need to get back to base, regroup," Torvin said, taking charge. "We'll figure out our next move once we're not on the menu." They moved quickly, retracing their steps through the tunnels with the kind of speed and precision born from multiple brushes with death. The shackles' labyrinthine passages whispered their secrets as they slipped through, shadows among shadows. But the sense of victory was short-lived. As they approached the exit, the distinctive whir of drones filled the air, a mechanical symphony that spelled trouble. "Damn it," Torvin swore, eyes scanning the dark for the source of the noise. "They've got surveillance drones. Those AI-backed bastards are one step ahead." "Great, because I really wanted a giant metal mosquito problem," Lyria muttered, her hand tightening around her weapon. The drones hovered like vultures circling a soon-to-be corpse, their sensors sweeping the area with robotic precision. They'd have to be fast and they'd have to be clever. "Any bright ideas, Lyria?" Torvin asked, his tone half joking, half desperate. "How about we make like a tree and leave?" Voss suggested, his grin returning despite the danger. "Funny guy," Lyria shot back, but her mind was already racing, searching for an escape route that didn't involve becoming drone chow. They moved, sticking to the shadows as best they could. Lyria's heart thundered in her chest, every nerve screaming at her to run faster, move smarter. The drones were closing in, their whir like the devil's lullaby. "Split up," Torvin ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Draw their attention. We'll regroup at the fallback point." It was a risky move, the kind that either ended in victory or a spectacularly messy failure. But they didn't have much choice, not with the drones bearing down on them like a pack of hungry wolves. Lyria took a deep breath and darted left, her feet pounding against the metal floor like a death knell. She zigzagged through the maze of corridors, the drones hot on her heels, their lights casting eerie shadows on the walls. But she knew the shackle like the back of her hand, every twist and turn mapped out in her mind. She led the drones on a merry chase, doubling back and weaving through tight spaces until she finally lost them. Breathing hard, she emerged into the open, the gilded shackles' twisted skyline greeting her like an old friend. The air was cold, biting against her skin, but it was a welcome reminder that she was still very much alive. Torvin and the others were waiting at the fallback point, their faces a mix of relief and exhaustion. The drones weren't far behind, their relentless pursuit a testament to Flint's tenacity. "Nice to see you made it," Torvin said, clapping her on the back. "You lose those tin cans." "For now," Lyria replied, glancing over her shoulder. "But they'll be back, probably with more friends." "Then we'd better get moving," Voss interjected, his voice urgent. "We've got a pilgrimage to stop, and I'd rather not do it with 100 drones on our tail." They nodded, the reality of their situation sinking in like a lead weight. They had a long road ahead, filled with more danger and uncertainty than they cared to admit. But for now, they were together, a ragtag band of rebels with more guts than good sense. And they'd fight, not because they had to, but because it was the right thing to do. Lyria looked out over the gilded shackle, its rusted expanse a reminder of everything they'd been through. They had a chance, a slim one but a chance nonetheless, to make a difference. And if they failed, they'd at least go down swinging, taking as many of the bastards with them as they could. It was the kind of plan that had gotten them this far, and it would have to be enough. "Let's move out," Torvin ordered, and they melted into the shadows once more, the weight of the world heavy on their shoulders but their spirits unbroken. Because in the end, all they had was each other, and sometimes that was all you needed. The rebels had managed to put some distance between themselves and the cultists, but the oppressive feeling of being hunted hung over them like a rain cloud with a vendetta. Their retreat through the gilded shackle was a mix of hurried whispers and quick glances over their shoulders. If they were any louder, they'd be announcing their presence with a brass band. "How's the arm, Voss?" Lyria asked, her voice low, half expecting an army of drones to pop out of the ductwork at any moment. "I could use a new one," Voss replied, cradling it with the care of someone holding a baby made of glass. "But considering the options, I'll take injured and alive over dead and dismembered any day." "Always the optimist," Torvin chimed in with a grin that suggested he found the whole situation morbidly entertaining. "You know me," Voss said, wincing as they turned a corner. "I look at the silver lining so much I'm practically blind." They paused at a junction, the labyrinthine paths of the shackle spreading out like the insides of a particularly rusted beast. Kelly was on point, her eyes darting more than a caffeine-fueled squirt on a sugar rush. "What's the plan, fearless leader?" she asked, her gaze flicking to Lyria. "Find a nice quiet corner to die in," Voss offered, clutching his arm. Lyria ignored him, her mind racing. The cult's plans to head to Earth had thrown a spanner in the works, one the size of a small moon. It wasn't just about rescuing Voss anymore. They had to stop a pilgrimage of zealots from crash landing on an already fragile Earth. "We need to regroup," Lyria decided, rubbing her temples, "and figure out a way to stop Flint from turning Earth into his personal lunatic asylum." "But no pressure, right?" Torvin added, his sarcasm thicker than the shackle's perpetual grime. They continued through the dimly lit corridors, their footsteps echoing softly. The shackle was less a structure and more a collection of bad decisions welded together and left to rust in the void. "But it was home in that I hate it but it's mine kind of way." Voss, limping slightly, suddenly stopped. "Hold up," he said, leaning against the wall like a man with a secret or at least a really bad itch. "What now?" Kelly asked, already sounding impatient. "I might have a way to actually take the fight to Flint," Voss said, his voice a mix of exhaustion and determination. "Does it involve us not getting killed?" Torvin asked, raising an eyebrow. Voss smirked despite the pain. "That's the idea. Back when I was their guest, I may have overheard something about their AI system having let's call it a design flaw." "Design flaw?" Lyria repeated, her interest piqued. "That sounds suspiciously like the kind of thing we need right now." Voss nodded, struggling to keep his breathing even. "Yeah. Apparently the AI backbone they've got running things isn't as bulletproof as they like to think. It's got a backdoor, and not the kind you use to sneak out of a bad date." Torvin laughed, a sharp sound in the gloomy corridor. "You telling us you can bring down their whole tech operation with a few keystrokes?" Voss shrugged, wincing again. "Well, I wouldn't go that far. But if we can exploit it, it might just give us the edge we need." "Of course, there's a catch," Kelly said, because of course there was. "These things always have a catch. The catch is we need to access one of their terminals," Voss admitted. "Preferably without getting shot, stabbed, or otherwise inconvenienced." "So, a stroll through enemy territory," Lyria summed up, her tone dripping with irony. "Great. Just the kind of suicidal mission I was hoping for. Look on the bright side, Torvin said, ever the devil's advocate. If we pull it off, we get to crash a cult party and save Earth. Two birds, one very explosive stone. Fine, Lyria agreed, though she looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. But we need to move fast. The longer we delay, the closer they get to making planetfall. They picked up the pace, moving with a sense of purpose. The shackles corridors seemed to close in around them, steel walls whispering secrets they didn't care to hear. The hum of distant machinery was their only companion, a monotonous mechanical heartbeat. As they neared their hidden base, the tension in the air was palpable, like the moment before a storm breaks. If they screwed this up, they'd be lucky to end up as smears on the wall. Home sweet home, Kelly muttered as they slipped through the cargo bay's old, stubborn doors. The place smelled like metal and desperation, a fitting ambience for their current mood. Inside, the rest of the rebels were gathered, faces drawn and eyes wary. They were a motley crew, held together by little more than stubbornness and a shared hatred for Flint's brand of fanaticism. "Good to see you're not dead," one of them remarked, waving a half-hearted greeting. "Give it time," Torvin replied with a chuckle. "The night's still young." Lyria gathered them around, detailing Voss's discovery and the opportunity it presented. As she spoke, their expressions shifted from skepticism to cautious optimism. "Are we really going to try this?" someone asked, sounding half hopeful, half terrified. "Why not?" Torvin said, flashing his trademark grin. "We've done stupider things." "True," Kelly agreed, her smile more a grimace. "And it's not like we have better options." Lyria nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. It was a familiar burden, one she'd carried for longer than she cared to remember. But this time, it felt heavier, a reminder of everything that was at stake. "All right," she said, her voice firm. "Let's gear up and get ready. We've got a cult to crash and a planet to save." The room buzzed with sudden energy as the rebels moved to prepare. Weapons were checked and rechecked, ammunition distributed with the kind of solemnity usually reserved for funerals. Voss sat down, looking pale but determined. "We pull this off, and maybe we'll even get to retire somewhere nice," he said, half joking. "Retirement," Torvin chuckled. "I have no idea what I'd do with myself." "You'd get bored," Lyria said, an unexpected smile tugging at her lips. "5 minutes in, you'd start another revolution just to keep busy." Torvin shrugged, not denying it. "Guilty as charged." "All right, everyone," Lyria said as the last preparations were made. "Let's do this. And remember, if you see Flint, give him a punch from me." With a final shared glance, they moved out, slipping back into the shackle's maw. The corridors seemed darker than before, as if sensing the danger that lay ahead. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows. Lyria led them with a confidence that belied the uncertainty she felt. The fate of Earth hung over them like a guillotine, ready to drop at the slightest misstep. Their target was a control hub hidden deep within the cult's territory, a place as dangerous as it was vital. If Voss was right, it would give them the leverage needed to turn the tide. The journey to the hub was precarious, each step a potential disaster. They encountered patrols, slipping past them with luck and a measure of skill that surprised even Lyria. But deep down, she knew it couldn't last. As they approached the hub, the tension ratcheted up several notches. It was a nondescript building, blending into its surroundings like a predator in wait. But the hum of machinery and the presence of guards marked it as their destination. "Hell of a place for a last stand," Torvin remarked, eyeing the building with a mix of excitement and dread. "It's not over yet," Lyria said, steeling herself. "We get in, get the data, and get out." "Simple?" "Yeah, simple," Voss echoed, though his expression suggested he was imagining something rather more explosive. Kelly took the lead, her fingers flying over the control panel by the entrance. It took a few tense moments, but the door eventually slid open with a reluctant hiss. Inside, the air was cooler, the walls lined with screens displaying a kaleidoscope of data. It was a techie's paradise and a rebel's nightmare. "Let's make this quick," Lyria said, moving to one of the terminals. Voss joined her, his fingers tapping keys with a familiarity that hinted at a past he rarely spoke of. As the minutes ticked by, Lyria kept a wary eye on the door, half expecting an army of cultists to burst in and ruin their day. But for now, things were quiet, a calm that was more unsettling than reassuring. "Got it," Voss finally said, his voice triumphant. "We've got control, at least temporarily." "Good," Lyria replied, her relief tempered by caution. "Now let's make sure we're not still here when they figure it out." They worked quickly, downloading everything they needed. The plan was to hit Flint where it hurt, undermining his control and turning his own tech against him. As they finished, the first signs of movement echoed from outside. The cultists had realized something was amiss, and they were about to have company. "Time to go," Kelly said, sealing the door behind them as they slipped back into the shadows. Their retreat was frantic, the corridors a blur as they raced against time. The cultists were hot on their heels, calling out in voices tinged with desperation and fanaticism. But Lyria and the rebels knew the shackles' twisting paths better than anyone, and they used that to their advantage, slipping through hidden passages and ducking into alcoves. As they neared the exit, Lyria felt a spark of hope. They'd done it. Against the odds, they'd pulled off the impossible. But as they emerged into the open, a familiar voice cut through the darkness, a voice that sent a chill down her spine. "I knew you'd come back," Flint said, stepping into view with a smile that promised nothing good. "Such a shame you're too late." Lyria's heart sank, but she forced herself to keep moving. They couldn't afford to stop now, not when they were so close. As they made their escape, Lyria looked back, locking eyes with Flint. There was a promise there, one she intended to keep, because the fight wasn't over. Not yet. And if Flint wanted a war, then by all means, she'd give him one. As Lyria and her ragtag group of rebels fled the scene, the corridors of the shackle seemed to close in on them like the world's ugliest hug. Emergency lights flickered on and off, painting the narrow passages in a strobe light cacophony of reds and shadows. It was a bit like being in a nightclub, except with more guns and significantly less fun. "We're not dead yet," Voss panted, doing his best to keep up despite his injuries. His face was a mask of determination and grim humor. "That's gotta be some kind of record for us." "Don't get cocky," Lyria shot back, her voice cutting through the din like a knife. "We've still got plenty of chances to screw this up." Torvin snorted, the sound somehow even more derisive than usual. "Yeah, let's not kid ourselves. The universe is just waiting to drop a piano on us." Kelly, ever vigilant, was bringing up the rear, her eyes flicking between the darkened corners and the group ahead. "Let's save the comedy routine for when we're not about to be human shish kebabs, shall we?" The rebels barreled down a particularly grimy corridor, the rusted metal walls narrowing like a throat threatening to choke them. It was a comforting reminder that the architects of this place clearly had a sense of humor, of the sadistic variety. They skidded to a halt at a junction, Lyria holding up a hand. The distant clatter of boots echoed from somewhere to their left, a search patrol, no doubt, or a welcoming committee for all the world's worst surprises. "Left or right, boss lady?" Torvin asked, barely masking the tension in his voice with bravado. "Left," Lyria decided, mostly because she could hear the faint hum of machinery that way. In the shackle, any direction that sounded like it might lead to an exit was a good bet. "Left it is," Voss muttered, wincing as he pressed a hand to his side. "Hope your gut's smarter than mine, Lyria. Otherwise, we're about to become a very small, very crispy footnote in cult history." They moved on, the sound of their pursuers growing ever closer. Lyria's mind raced with contingency plans, each more desperate than the last. They'd gotten what they came for, or at least most of it. Now they just had to survive long enough to make it count. They burst into a larger chamber, the rusty innards of the shackle sprawling around them like the guts of some enormous, long-dead beast. It was a place filled with pipes and conduits and the smell of old oil, a mechanic's fever dream and an escape artist's nightmare. "This way," Lyria hissed, leading them into the maze of metal. She moved with the confidence of someone who had far too much experience navigating labyrinths, and far too much to lose. Ever get the feeling the universe is just messing with us? Torvin asked, ducking under a low-hanging pipe. Or is that just my paranoia talking? It's not paranoia if they are actually out to get you, Kelly replied, casting a wary glance over her shoulder. Pretty sure that's the motto of this whole operation. They scrambled through the tangle of industrial detritus, the sound of pursuit growing fainter. Lyria paused to catch her breath, her mind whirring like the gears of a malfunctioning clock. They had to get back to their hideout, regroup, and figure out their next move. Flint wouldn't wait, and time was against them. Voss leaned against a wall, his face pale but defiant. So what's the plan, besides not dying, I mean? Find a hole to crawl into and hope Flint gets bored, Torvin suggested with a wry grin. Or we could try that fight-back thing we talked about. We've got the data, Lyria said, her voice firm. That's something. We'll use it to hit Flint where it hurts. But first, we need to get out of here in one piece. The sound of distant shouting interrupted them, a reminder that their little tete-a-tete wasn't exactly happening in a secure location. With a resigned sigh, Lyria pushed off from the wall. All right, let's move. I'd rather not be here when the cultists get whatever passes for backup. They pressed on, slipping through corridors that clung to the smell of decay and desperation. The shackle had a way of making you feel like you were walking through history's worst mistake. It was a feeling Lyria was well acquainted with, and she didn't have time for it now. As they neared the exit, the familiar silhouette of their hideout loomed ahead, like a lighthouse for the terminally unlucky. The cargo bay door stood ajar, a silent invitation to a sanctuary that was anything but safe. Home sweet rust, Torvin remarked with a cynical lilt, sidling through the gap with the ease of a man who had dodged more than his fair share of bullets. Inside, the rest of the rebels were in various states of readiness, weapons at hand and faces grim. This was the core of their little rebellion, a ragtag family bound by necessity and a shared disdain for Flint's brand of insanity. Look what the cat dragged in, someone called, their voice tinged with relief. Thought we'd lost you out there. Not for lack of trying, Voss replied, sinking gratefully onto a makeshift seat. But we're not dead yet, so let's call it a win. Lyria wasted no time, gathering the rebels for a quick debrief. She laid out the data they'd secured, her words a mixture of hope and steel. It wasn't much, but it was something, a threadbare lifeline in a sea of chaos. So we've got a chance then, Kelly said, her eyes narrowing. Maybe not a good one, but it's there. I'll take long odds over none any day, Torvin added, his grin a flash of teeth in the dim light. Besides, I like a good underdog story. The room buzzed with a renewed sense of purpose, the rebels rallying around their meager victory. It was a far cry from triumph, but it was enough to keep them going, for now. As plans were made and roles assigned, Lyria couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. It was a familiar sensation, like an old friend who'd overstayed their welcome. The cult's fleet was still heading to Earth, and they were the only thing standing in its way. We'll hit them before they can make their move, she said, her voice cutting through the noise. We've got the data and we've got the know-how. All we need is a little luck. Luck, Torvin echoed, as if tasting the word. Not exactly our specialty, but stranger things have happened. With the plans in motion, the rebels dispersed, each taking on their part of the burden. The air was thick with tension, the kind that came from knowing you were putting everything on a single throw of the dice. Lyria found herself alone for a moment, staring at the rusted metal walls of their hideout. Her reflection stared back, eyes shadowed and unyielding. It was a face that had seen too much but wasn't done fighting yet. Hey, Voss said, limping over to stand beside her. You all right? His voice was a reminder of why they fought, of the hope that still flickered, however dimly. Lyria nodded, forcing a smile that felt more real than any she'd worn in weeks. Yeah, she replied, her voice quiet but steady. Just thinking about what comes next. Voss chuckled, a sound like the creak of old machinery. Well, whatever it is, I'm sure it'll be a hell of a show, assuming we live long enough to see it. That's the plan, Lyria said, giving him a sidelong glance. And if we're lucky, we might even get to watch Flint's empire come crashing down. With a final shared nod, they rejoined the others, ready to face whatever came next. The cult's fleet was on the move and the clock was ticking. But for now, they had a plan and a glimmer of hope. And in this twisted, unforgiving universe, that was more than enough. Hours passed in a blur of preparation, the rebels working with a focused intensity that belied the fear lurking beneath the surface. Weapons were cleaned, ammo counted, and plans reviewed with the kind of solemnity usually reserved for funerals, fitting, given the odds they faced. Lyria moved among them, offering encouragement and advice where needed. She could feel the weight of her role pressing down on her, a familiar burden that she bore with stoic resolve. They were counting on her, and she wouldn't let them down. Ready as we'll ever be became the mantra, muttered with varying degrees of conviction as they gathered for the final briefing. The plan was simple: hit the cult's fleet while it was vulnerable, exploiting the weaknesses they'd uncovered to sow chaos and cripple its advance. Simple, of course, being a relative term. "Remember," Lyria said, her voice carrying over the hushed conversations, "we're going in fast and hard. Hit them before they realize what's happening, and for the love of whatever gods you believe in, watch each other's backs." Sounds like a typical Saturday night, Torvin quipped, earning a few grim chuckles. "Except with more explosions," Kelly snorted, adjusting the strap on her rifle, "and fewer bad decisions, hopefully." With a nod, Lyria signaled for them to move out. The rebels filed through the cargo bay doors, each carrying the hopes of their fractured world on their shoulders. It was a heavy load, but one they bore with a grim determination. The corridors of the shackle felt different this time, less like the walls were closing in and more like they were being watched. It was a sensation Lyria couldn't shake, though she tried to ignore it. The stakes were too high for distractions. They reached their launch point without incident, slipping into the hangar with practiced ease. The rebels moved with a confidence that belied the uncertainty of their mission, each step a testament to their resolve. The ships waited for them, sleek and deadly in the dim light, a reminder of the fight that lay ahead. Lyria climbed into the cockpit of her own craft, the controls familiar and reassuring beneath her fingers. "All right, people," she said, keying her comm. "Let's show these cultists what happens when you poke a hornet's nest." With a roar of engines, the rebel ships launched, hurtling into the void with a speed that left the hangar far behind. It was a sensation Lyria relished, the adrenaline pounding in her veins like a drum. As they closed in on the cult's fleet, the tension ratcheted up a notch. The enemy ships loomed ahead, dark shapes against the stars, a formidable obstacle but not an insurmountable one. "Remember the plan," Lyria reminded them, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her insides. "Stick to your targets and don't get cocky." The first wave hit with the force of a sledgehammer, the rebel ships tearing into the cult's defenses with a ferocity born of desperation. Explosions blossomed in the void, silent and deadly, as the battle unfolded. Lyria weaved through the chaos, her ship a blur of motion as she targeted the enemy's weak points. Each shot was a calculated risk, the odds shifting with every maneuver, but for now, at least, they were holding their own. "Looks like they weren't expecting company," Voss said over the comm, his tone a mix of satisfaction and disbelief. "Just the way I like it," Kelly's voice crackled through the static, sharp and focused. "Don't get too comfortable, they are regrouping." True to her word, the cultists were rallying, their ships moving to counter the rebel assault. It was a dance of death, each side jockeying for position in the endless expanse of space. But Lyria was undeterred, her mind a whirlwind of strategies and possibilities. They'd come too far to falter now, and she was determined to see this through. As the battle surged around them, the rebels fought with everything they had, their movements a testament to their resilience and ingenuity. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they were never outmatched. And as the cult's fleet began to falter, Lyria felt a flicker of hope, a fragile thing, but one that burned brightly in the darkness. They were making a difference, and that was all that mattered. Yet even as they pressed the attack, Lyria couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The real battle was still to come, and they would need every scrap of courage and cunning to face it. For now, though, they fought on, driven by the knowledge that they were not alone. They were a force to be reckoned with, and they would not be silenced. Together, the gilded shackle loomed like a cosmic brick wall someone forgot to tear down. Those rusty corridors weren't just narrow, they were practically squeezing out resentment. If walls could sigh in exasperation, these would have started therapy sessions by now. "How do we get into these messes?" Torvin muttered, adjusting his gear with the enthusiasm of a cat faced with bath time. Kelly, always the hawk-eyed realist, replied, "Mostly 'cause we follow Lyria like lost puppies, except our bark's worse than our bite." Lyria ignored them, busy calculating a million ways their plan could go wrong. She wasn't worried, though. Worry was for people who hadn't already kissed death on the mouth and lived to tell the tale. Voss, still nursing an injury that would have sidelined a lesser man, grinned. "Hope you all remember the plan. I'm not explaining it again. My patience is reserved for things that bleed." "Like your ego," Torvin shot back, grinning like a wolf who just found a meat locker. Lyria cut through their bickering with military precision. "Focus, people. We're not here for a picnic. The High Prophet's fleet is on our tail, and we're the last line of defense before Earth becomes a cosmic cult convention." "Great. Just what humanity needs. More lunatics with delusions of grandeur," Kelly deadpanned, eyeing the makeshift hologram of their battle plan. It flickered like an old neon sign, but it was all they had. The idea was simple. Use the EMP device to throw a wrench into the cult's AI, High Prophet Flint's digital brainchild. Without it, the cultists were just a bunch of space tourists who'd lost their itinerary. "Remember," Lyria said, her gaze sweeping over the ragtag crew, "hit them hard and fast. We disrupt their network, Earth's resistance picks up the pieces. And then we ride off into the sunset, right?" Torvin quipped, knowing full well there were no sunsets in space, just more darkness. "No sunsets," Lyria corrected. "But maybe a chance to breathe without looking over our shoulders for a change." The hangar doors opened like a maw into the void, and just like that they were out, a squadron of battered ships pushing into the void. The stars streaked by, indifferent to the chaos about to unfold. As they approached the cult's fleet, Voss's voice crackled over the comms. "Looks like they're rolling out the welcome mat." Complete with a firing squad, Lyria's ship bobbed and weaved, a dance she knew by heart. "Hit the EMP on my mark. The AI goes down and we mop up the rest." The fleet ahead shimmered, a wall of metal and zealotry. The cultists believed Earth was their promised land, a celestial destination and ticket to enlightenment. Lyria just saw another bunch of fanatics trying to ruin her day. "Brace yourselves," she warned as the EMP went live. The pulse rippled out, a silent wave of chaos that scrambled the fleet systems. The effect was immediate. The cult ships faltered, their meticulously synchronized dance turned into a chaotic brawl. Alarms blared, lights flickered, and the drone army became as useless as a politician's promise. "Now," Lyria commanded, and the rebels descended like vultures, picking apart the chaos with methodical precision. The battle was brutal, a symphony of explosions and the screech of tearing metal. Lyria kept her eyes on the prize, maneuvering through the fray like a gambler who just spotted an easy mark. On the ground, Earth's resistance fighters took advantage of the disruption, rallying against the cultists who'd managed to touch down. The cult no longer had the AI omnipotent eye, and they floundered like fish out of water. "How are we doing, Voss?" Lyria barely heard her own voice over the noise. "Still breathing," Voss replied, his ship dancing across the battlefield with reckless grace. "You know, this might actually work." Kelly, in her usual tone, added, "Don't jinx it. We still need to make sure they can't reboot that AI." Lyria grunted in agreement. The EMP had given them an edge, but the cult's tech was like a bad rash. It had a habit of coming back when you least wanted it. With precision strikes, the rebels targeted the fleet's infrastructure, dismantling the cult's control piece by piece. The High Prophet's grand vision was unraveling like a poorly knit sweater, one tug, and the whole thing fell apart. The ship's emergency lights flickered in a parody of a disco, casting eerie shadows on the chaos below. Lyria's gaze swept over the battlefield, assessing, recalibrating, looking for any hint of the High Prophet's presence. "Watch out for Flint's cleanup crew," she warned. "They might try to salvage this mess." "Let 'em try," Torvin replied. "I could use another souvenir. That last one looks great on my mantle." The battle raged on, each moment a testament to human stubbornness. Lyria could almost hear the universe laughing at their audacity, but she didn't care. They were winning bit by bloody bit. Suddenly, a transmission cut through the static, a voice, smooth and confident, dripping with the kind of charisma that could lead sheep to slaughter. "Well done, rebels," Flint's voice oozed through the comms, dripping with a smug satisfaction. "You've disrupted my plans for now, but remember there's always another path to enlightenment." Lyria rolled her eyes. "Enlightenment or just more excuses to play God?" Flint chuckled, a sound like velvet over steel. "Call it what you will, but Earth will be ours. It's only a matter of time." "Time's a luxury you don't have," Lyria shot back. "Not as long as we're here." "Then I'll see you soon," Flint replied, his voice fading into the static like a bad memory. The rebels pressed on, driving the cultists back with relentless determination. Each victory was a step closer to securing their freedom, a chance to reclaim what had been stolen. Earth's resistance pushed forward, emboldened by the rebels' success. They poured from the shadows, fighting with a desperation born of years under the cult's thumb. Lyria watched as the cult's fleet began to disintegrate, their once mighty presence reduced to scattered debris. The AI had been their Achilles' heel, and they'd kicked it hard. "Keep pressing," Lyria ordered. "We need to finish this." The rebels moved like a well-oiled machine, every action precise and purposeful. They fought not just for survival, but for the chance to be more than pawns in someone else's game. And slowly, inexorably, the tide turned. The cult's forces crumbled, their zealotry no match for human grit. The rebels had outsmarted the AI, dismantled its control, and paved the way for Earth's freedom. As the last cultist ship spiraled into oblivion, Lyria allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. They'd faced impossible odds and come out on top, proving once again that humanity was a force to be reckoned with. But she knew this wasn't the end. There were always more battles to fight, more shadows lurking in the void. For now, though, they'd won a victory that mattered. And maybe, just maybe, they'd earned the right to dream of a better future. Lyria turned her ship back toward the gilded shackle, her heart heavy with the knowledge that whatever came next, they'd face it together. "Nice work," Voss said, pulling alongside her. "Didn't think we'd pull it off, but here we are." "Here we are," Lyria echoed, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Now let's get out of here before something else decides to blow up." "Good idea," Kelly agreed, her voice a mix of relief and exhaustion. "I've had enough excitement for one day." As they headed back, Lyria felt the weight of their journey lift, if only for a moment. They were still rebels in a universe that didn't care, but they were alive. And in a galaxy full of darkness, that was more than enough. The gilded shackle, no longer an oppressive labyrinth of rust and regret, now buzzed with a sense of tentative possibility. The place was still a mess, like a teenager's room after a fit of rage, but there was a whiff of hope mixed in with the metallic tang of machinery. Humanity had punched the cult's ticket to cosmic oblivion, and Lyria was determined to savor the moment before reality inevitably sucker-punched her with its usual brand of misery. Lyria stood in what once passed for a control room, not that anything had been particularly controllable in this scrap palace. She surveyed the chaos below, a mix of rebels and Earth's resistance fighters moving with the aimless urgency of ants on a sugar high. They were free for now, and that was a heady feeling worth bottling. "Ever think we'd see the day?" Voss asked, limping in with the grace of a drunk hippo. His injury was healing, albeit slowly, but his patience hadn't improved one bit. Lyria smirked. I figured I'd be dead long before we got to play heroes. Guess the universe loves a good plot twist. She leaned against the console, eyes scanning the room filled with haggard faces. We've dismantled the cult, kicked their AI to the curb, and banned Earth's status as a cosmic amusement park. Not bad for a day's work. Torvin appeared, looking like he just crawled out of a garbage compactor. I'd toast to that, but we're out of booze again. Remind me why we trust people to ration anything. Kelly, hovering nearby, shrugged. Because we like to pretend we're still civilized, even when we're living in a dumpster fire. Dumpster fire or not, we made it, Lyria said, her voice carrying a note of genuine pride. We're the scrappy underdogs who bit back. Yeah, but now what? Torvin asked, leaning against the wall with the weariness of someone who's been through too many battles. What's the plan, boss? Lyria glanced around, taking in the sight of her ragtag crew. They were dirty, tired, and utterly irreplaceable. For starters, we rebuild. Before the High Prophet's fleet swooped in like a swarm of deranged bees, this place was part of a Dyson swarm. It's time we made it something more than a haunted house. And Earth, Voss's voice was low, serious. What about those left behind? Lyria's expression hardened. Earth's free of the cult's grip. We've scrapped their pilgrimage plans, turned enlightenment into a punchline. But it's up to us to make sure it stays free. No more AI overlords pulling the strings. Kelly nodded, eyes sharp. I don't trust easy victories. There's always a catch. Of course there's a catch, Lyria replied with a sardonic grin. But for now, we take the win. Let's not look a gift horse in the mouth until it kicks us. The tension that had hovered like a storm cloud seemed to lift, replaced by a kind of cautious optimism. Maybe, just maybe, things would get better. As the days trickled by like sand through a fist, the gilded shackle began to transform. The corridors still whispered tales of rust and ruin, but now they hummed with a different energy, one of rebuilding, of forging a future out of the wreckage of the past. Voss busied himself overseeing repairs, barking orders as if yelling could weld metal. Kelly, ever the realist, managed supplies with the skill of someone who'd long ago accepted that life was a juggling act. Torvin mostly got underfoot but occasionally managed to be useful. And Lyria became something she never expected, a leader. She had the reluctant respect of her crew, who'd followed her through hell and back. They looked to her for guidance, and she'd be damned if she'd let them down. Being in charge was a bit like juggling chainsaws. One wrong move and it could all come crashing down. But she'd never been one to shy away from a challenge, and this was no different. One evening, after the day's work was done and the shackle was as quiet as it ever got, Lyria found herself alone, staring out into the void. The stars were indifferent observers, twinkling with a kind of cosmic apathy. We did it, she murmured, not to anyone in particular. We actually did it. Talking to yourself is a bad sign, came a voice from behind. Voss, of course, because who else would interrupt her moment of existential reflection? Or a sign of genius, Lyria shot back, smirking. How's the leg? Voss shrugged, the movement casual but his eyes betraying a hint of discomfort. Still attached. That's all I can ask for these days. They stood in silence for a moment, companionable and easy, the weight of the universe a little lighter on their shoulders. You ever wonder what comes next? Voss asked, his tone unusually contemplative. Lyria sighed, a sound that was more breath than voice. All the time. But for now, we focus on rebuilding, on making sure Earth doesn't become a target again. On giving humanity a fighting chance. Voss nodded, and a ghost of a smile touched his lips. You know, for someone who claims not to care about people, you're doing a hell of a job pretending otherwise. Before Lyria could retort, Kelly appeared, her expression one of amused exasperation. You two done brooding. We've got a council meeting in 5 minutes, and I'd rather not start it by dragging your sorry asses in. Lyria rolled her eyes but couldn't help the warmth that spread through her chest. It was moments like these, surrounded by her ragtag family, that made everything worth it. The council meeting was as chaotic as expected. The shackle's new inhabitants, resistance fighters, rebels, and everyone in between had opinions, and none of them were shy about sharing them. "Let me get this straight," Torvin was saying, his sarcasm dialed up to 11. "We're gonna turn this place into a hub for Earth's resistance. Won't that just paint a big target on our backs?" "We've already got a target," Kelly pointed out, ever the pragmatist. "Might as well make it worth something. Besides, the more resources we have, the better our chances." Lyria nodded, fingers tapping a rhythm on the table. "We're the closest thing to a central command Earth's got. We don't just hold the line, we strengthen it. We're not victims anymore, we're the voice that shouts not today." There was a murmur of agreement, a shift in the room's mood. They'd fought hard and lost much, but they were still here, still standing. Torvin leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with a look of resigned acceptance. "Guess that means more work for us, who knew being heroes came with a day job." "You'll survive," Voss quipped, his grin sly. "Or not. Either way, it'll be entertaining." As the meeting dragged on, filled with more plans and contingencies than anyone cared to count, Lyria allowed herself a moment of detachment. They were planning for a future, something she never thought possible, and it was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. When the meeting finally wound down, Lyria found herself once again at the window, gazing out into the endless expanse of space. She was joined by Torvin, who loitered with the air of someone with nowhere else to be. "Nice view," he remarked, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Shame it's wasted on us." Lyria chuckled softly. "Suppose it's a bit poetic. We fight for the promise of a better tomorrow, but we're stuck looking at yesterday's mess." "Could be worse," Torvin said, a wry smile playing at his lips. "We could be dead, true." Lyria's gaze drifted to the stars, pinpricks of light in the darkness. They were reminders of how small they were, but also of the vast potential that lay before them. "So what's next, fearless leader?" Torvin's tone was teasing, but there was a genuine question beneath it. "Next," Lyria repeated, considering. "Next, we keep fighting. We make sure Earth stays free. We build something out of the ashes. It's not perfect, but it's ours." Torvin nodded, satisfied. "Not a bad plan for now." "For now," Lyria agreed, her voice steady. "And when the next storm hits, we'll face it together." They stood there, side by side, two survivors in a galaxy that had done its best to break them. They were far from done, but they'd earned this moment of peace. In the end, that was what mattered. The gilded shackle hummed around them, a testament to resilience and defiance. It was their beacon in the void, a promise of what could be. And as long as they had breath, they'd fight for it. "Here's to the future," Lyria murmured, barely audible over the machinery's hum. "Here's to us," Torvin replied, and for once there was no sarcasm, only a quiet truth shared between comrades. They had won a battle, but the war continued. Yet in this moment, with the shackle beneath their feet and the stars stretching out before them, they knew they would endure. And that was the greatest victory of all.